What's up, E? What's up, Fernando? How's it going, guys? How you living? It's been a minute. I swear, and I'm being dead honest with you guys, this show does not air every other week. This is supposed to be a weekly wrestling talk show. Unfortunately, I can't seem to make it here every week these days, but that is still generally the goal. How you guys doing? What's going on? Happy Thursday to you. Happy in between pay-per-view weeks. Yeah, AEW on Saturday. We had WWE last week. A little bit easier to manage than two pay-per-views on one day. I found myself to be less grumpy as a result. What's up, CB? I don't play 2K, but if anyone can help out CB with his question, let him know. Yes, Ash is counter programming. That is not intentional. If you guys get into her chat, tell her I'm saying sorry. Here's how. Let me give you a little behind the scenes. She's doing that on her channel, so it really wasn't on the brass ring side of things. But still, as a teammate, I want to be a good teammate, and realizing that I was going to be going live at the same time she was. I was like, oh no, that's kind of messed up. So I'm like, okay, let me send her a message to let her know, like, hey, I didn't do it on purpose. I'll promote your show while we're on here. My bad. Unfortunately, because I'm not like verified and she doesn't also follow me, I couldn't send her a DM. So E, if you would, and I'm being dead serious about this, let her know in her chat that I am sorry that that Browse Ring is counter programming against her at the moment. That was not my intention. So please let her know that. And you guys should check out her show. So I having a little trouble getting it here. If one of you guys has the link to her show, post it in the chat. That way, if people don't want to hear me talk, they can go check out Ashley. They can do what E is doing. They got the E's a multitasker. I don't know if E's ever seen the sun because E is online all the time. And E is always here. He's got the scoops on everything NXT. He's got my Kennedy podcast covered, and he has like the Brass Ring Media Extended Universe covered. He's got all of that going, and now he's been a great listener here. He's gonna tell her that like I'm out for blood here. that's what you see the sun. E, okay, all right. So what's happening, guys? How you living? How's life? I should introduce myself and not show you my bills that are here on my desk. I'm Rob. This is the Nocturnal Knockout. And we are collectively, I think, Brass Ring Media. How's it going, guys? Hope you've been enjoying some of the different content you've been getting from Brass Ring this week. Pretty big wrestling interview that Dom did. Dom's been killing it with his content. He's like the only consistent one lately. And then Zach is back from his top secret mission that he was on. So in case you haven't noticed that, like in your inboxes, for those of you that are subscribed to the Substack, you've been getting your Raw and NXT reports, just like that. Zach's been cranking them out. So glad that you're all along for the ride. For those of you that are new, as I said, my name's Rob. This is the Nocturnal Knockout, and what this show is, it is a wrestling show. Yes, just like any other wrestling show on the internet. But we like to have fun. We like to talk about our own topics. We like to go in our own directions, or we could just have traditional wrestling talk. But that's kind of what we like to do. We like to hang out, put our feet up, usually at the end of a work day, sometimes at the end of a pay-per-view. Selling out with my Coke today. No beers tonight or anything. But if you want to pop open a cold one of some pipe, put it in the chat. Don't put the actual drink in the chat. Like, don't spill it on your computer, you freaks. But let me know what you're drinking, what you're doing, what's going on a Thursday night. I legit don't know who's playing Thursday Night Football today. I always do like a little bit of a Thursday Night Football kind of teaser on this show, and I have no idea who's playing tonight. So if you guys want to tell me that also, you guys can inform me of that, because we always have a bit of a sports thread going through every one of our shows. My team is so bad this year, so dysfunctional. we don't know what's going on with team meetings, all that crap. That like I'm ready for NBA. I'm all in on like NBA in October this year. This is how it was for years and years. And then my team gave me this like little peek thinking they were going to be good for a couple of years. And I got back into the NFL, and that was a mistake. Don't get into the NFL if your team's not good, folks. Good. See, Fernando, you're a great brass ring viewer. Not like that troublemaker E that we have to corral. Yeah, man. We're not going to talk too much about the Seth injury, but God, what bad timing that is, and what weird serendipity that is going back from the summer with the fake injury. Like, I got no problem with um them doing a worked injury angle, even if they're going to work the boys a little bit. Like, so what? Everything gets out. You kind of, if you want to hold any semblance of pro wrestling in any way, you got to keep some things under wrap. You got to work people a little bit. If everyone's going to be blabbing, and if WWE themselves are going to be exposing a lot of stuff, you got to keep mystery when you can keep it. It's unfortunate that this appears to be a legit injury just a few months later, so you have people questioning it. But it does mess with like our expectations, because I've seen the reports that even backstage there are still people that are skeptical, because let's face it, the office worked them last time. So, you kind of have a little bit of hesitation. But boy, Seth Rollins gets hurt at the wrong times, doesn't he? Like, there's never good times to get hurt, but Seth always gets hurt when he's about to like ascend. And I wasn't too into everything that's been going on with Seth. Honestly, I think the injury might help reset things for a lot of people involved, but you don't want to see him get hurt. He's an extremely talented performer, very important part of the overall construct of the show. So what a heck of a blow that was, coming off of that pay-per-view. A pay-per-view that I thought, honestly, WWE got their mojo back a little bit. Felt like they finally had one of their good shows that they would have had a couple of years ago. That was the least disappointed I think any of us had been in a WWE pay-per-view in a really, really long time. And a big part of that, I think, was having the Cena match where it was placed on the card, with the emotional dump that all that was with AJ, but having it at that moment, and then having the last two matches being really high, especially that main event. I thought that main event with Seth and Cody is great. Those two, there's people you have Punk and Cena, you have AJ and Cena. It's kind of what's on the mind. Those two men, Punk and AJ, have just excellent chemistry with John Cena. And it's different for different wrestlers. Cena and Orton, famously, as we've talked about, despite facing each other a bazillion times, don't actually have a ton of chemistry when they get involved. Flying headbutt was a dumb idea, Fernando. I'm going to have to boost that comment. Have we not learned the horrible things that happened from constantly doing the flying headbutt? Let's see. To name a few, we have Harley Race, who, as far as we know, lived a fairly normal life as you would as Harley Race, but had extreme pain in his neck for the entirety of his life. And I think really, really regretted even popularizing that move. It's just something that shouldn't be done. And now he got out like the most scot-free of anyone else who did that move. Bryan Danielson, you can't really point to it being the flying headbutt, but he would do it often. He lost 5 years of his career and may have ultimately still had to retire early, even after coming back, because of the injuries to that region. You also have Dynamite Kid, who lived the second half of his life wheelchair bound, did the move, faced tons of consequences. And then, of course, as CB is putting out there, I don't got to explain to you the problem with Chris Benoit. Although, CB, you got the same initials as Benoit. It doesn't mean anything. It's just something that I noticed. And we all know the results there. So, hey, guys, let's just stop doing flying headbutts. Look at how it happens. You do it one time. So flying headbutts, and then Seth himself is not allowed to buckle bomb. Like, other people can buckle bomb, but Seth isn't. Overall, though, I thought the pay-per-view was really, really good. I liked seeing Roman actually lose. As convoluted as it was, it actually adds a little bit to that storyline for a change. But, who knows where we're at. So Fernando's got Breaker winning the vacated title instead of Punk, and then having Punk win the Elimination Chamber and beating Cody at Mania. Punk's stock, I think, in the internet wrestling discourse has fallen a lot in the past year. But if you recall, leading into WrestleMania last year, when they were doing different little teases, like prior to the Rumble, when they would tease Cody and Punk, that would get a hell of a reaction. So I wouldn't be opposed to that. It's funny because last night, I got to tell you guys, I was on. I was thinking about the show, thinking about what I want to talk about, and do you have that moment where you're like, you want to go back to what happened on Saturday and you want to think about what everyone was thinking about at that moment? Because my thoughts of Saturday, I think, are somewhat tainted because of everything that happened on Monday with the injury and what all those results meant. And there's a lot to adjust to. But I didn't want to go back in time. So I fired up my Torch subscription. Shout out to PW Torch, a trusted wrestling source for nearly 40 years at this point. I think the Torch and myself are the same age. So I track my age through Torch anniversaries. But I went through and I was actually curious because I liked but didn't love the AJ versus Cena match. I understood why people really liked it, but I thought all of the tributes and stuff turned a little corny after a while. But I might just be like, I don't know, cynical, jaded, the killer of fun. I think when you do wrestling podcasts for a little while, you become so hypercritical of things because you're always looking at it in a certain way. So I was like, you know what? You know whose opinion I really trust on these kind of things and who won't go with whatever the crowd is saying? I was like, let me check out what Wade Keller had to say. So I went in, and last night I was going through his report, and again, I'm a big fan and supporter of Wade. I would not know Zach without Wade. I would not be talking about wrestling or MMA on the internet, or would not have confidence to talk about anything else, to be honest with you, had it not been for Wade Keller. So any run that I get in the pro wrestling media space is entirely due to Wade. So I really respect his opinion. I think I disagree with him often. And I also like to clown Wade because I think what's funny about both Wade and Dave that no one really wants to point out is, I don't know if wrestling discourse is necessarily a young man's game, because there's a lot of internet urchins who are like, I said rounding about the 40s and still, talking about this stuff and reliving Attitude Era stuff and all of that. But Wade and Dave are of a generation even removed from that. And they still stay in the fight, so to speak. Like, they haven't retreated to these other more like legacy media styles or anything like that. Well, you tell Ash that if she has something to say right here, right now, tonight, let's not make the people wait. So I wanted to see what Wade had to say specifically about the match, but I was just going through it and I was scrolling through it. I would go through, and as you go through the Torch with the television reports, one of the things, and a lot of people have adopted this in what they do, but the way Wade distinguishes his reporting from his analysis within his report is he does the italics. So I was just like curious, what did Wade have to say? Because I didn't listen to the post show, the VIP audio show. I didn't listen to that. So I was going through, and I realized that we might have a bit of a segment, a good-natured segment on our hands. I think we need to start examining some of these Wade Keller digressions, because like everyone digresses. Dave can be all scattered on podcasts. I haven't got to the point, and I only have like 20 minutes left of what I was going to talk about today. People meander on podcasts and in writing. But certain things really like get to Wade, one of them being grammar. And so I just thought we should every now and then check in on some of Wade Keller's digressions, or more importantly, some of his corrections. So just a way to have some fun at the end of the work week. Let's break down this piece of prose by our friend Wade Keller. Wade says, Cole thanked Green Day for the song One-Eyed Bastard. Grammar nerd moment. One-eyed bastard without the hyphen, as Green Day actually spells it, indicates that there's one bastard who is eyed. Indicated one bastard in particular has at least one quote-unquote eye. But with the properly included hyphen for the compound adjective, it indicates there's a bastard with one eye, which is clearly what they meant. Don't get me started on Oasis album, Standing on the Shoulder of Giants. So that is our weekly grammar lesson from Wade Keller. I need you guys to start using your hyphens with your compound adjectives correctly, or Wade Keller will correct you. Thanks, E. Thanks, E. All right, so that is Wade. That is Wade Keller's digression. That is Wade Keller's corrections. And I gotta tell you, let me pull the curtain back. Because of Wade's grammar policeness, which like I live, work in all around educators. I've been an English teacher before, correcting people, grammar, spelling. I got no problem with that. You have never felt anxiety, like the anxiety of sending Wade Keller an email though, like a long email with a lot of things in it, because you just know he's gonna pick apart every piece, even if he's not telling you. It's ingested in that man's head, and he's watching you. All right. So one more thing I got to talk to you guys about. I actually have another. It's like a Zoom meeting kind of situation that I have to go to in like 20 minutes. So this was going to be a bite-sized show. It's kind of why I'm messing around, making fun of Wade Keller's grammar nerdness. So, and CB's pointing out something about Dave there. He says, if you want a good laugh, listen to Dave Meltzer. He's such a jackass. Yeah, Dave out of context is great. Classical Dave is really good. It's funny and stupid he sounds every time he defines AEW for the shit booking. No, Dave is great. Brian Alvarez's early TNA reviews are also the stuff of gold. So that's what I kind of want to build out a universe here where I don't have any interest. Like, if I want to do media criticism, we can do media criticism, but like real media criticism, not just like making fun and laughing at people and doing the internet thing. But I think like if we find things in good, like shout out to Wade, he really cares about how things are written, and it's kind of a funny tick of how they get to him. So whenever we can point out like good natured ribbing of people that we generally like, I think you guys need to bring them in the chat. We need to make this a regular thing where we clown people in wrestling media for doing funny things that are their ticks. Like, there's probably ways I move my hands. There's gonna be a whole podcast that like 3 people are watching that would make fun of it. So as I was saying though, and thinking about what was going on this weekend, I had a premonition about something, about a time period that we're in right now. You asked my students, I was not a cool English teacher at all. They would not say that. I was a good teacher, but they would not say I was cool. So as I was saying, I filter everything I think through through NBA history and figure that out how to talk to you guys. And something really struck me over the weekend. We're in a very unique time period about something that no one has really paid attention to, because we've been watching John Cena's retirement, that I don't think we have really looked at the bigger picture. So what I'm going to put up on my screen for those of you that are watching on YouTube, thank you. And I'll describe it for those of you who are listening on audio. I have, if you can't make it out, for NBA heads, you should know what we're looking at here. What we're looking at here is some Hall of Fame classes. You've got the Hall of Fame class of 2009, pictured C. Vivian Stringer, John Stockton, David Robinson, the Admiral, and 45, MJ, His Airness. They all went into the Hall of Fame the same year. 3 of the 4 of them played in the league. I think Vivian Stringer probably could have coached in the league. To my right-hand corner, I couldn't get the same kind of shot of it for obvious reasons. You have Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, and the late, great Mamba, Kobe Bryant. That, my friends, was the Hall of Fame class of 2016. And at the lower left-hand corner of my screen, you have Pau Gasol, Dirk Nowitzki, Dwayne Wade, and Tony Parker, the class of 2023. Now, why am I showing you NBA Hall of Fame classes? I mean, if anything, to use an example for the NBA Hall of Fame might be the worst thing, or the Naismith Hall of Fame, excuse me. Because I think you just had to have played basketball and contributed positively to the sport to be in it. And that's just whereas like the Baseball Hall of Fame has these ridiculous guardrails for getting in. in basketball, if you made a contribution to the sport, you're kind of honored. It's actually very similar, I would say, to wrestling Hall of Fames in that way. But these Hall of Fames I just showed you, those are no joke Hall of Fames. Those are obvious, first ballot, no question Hall of Famers. And when you have strong Hall of Fame classes in sports, especially the way you have usually like a 5-year moratorium period after retirement into the next phase, and we can really evaluate your career as a whole. But whenever we have these type of big, momentous first ballot Hall of Fame classes, what that signals more than anything is that the sport changed, or at least an era of the sport turned the page at about the same time. The biggest example, what I'm looking at here, I would say, would be in the right-hand corner with that class of 2020. I think I said 2016 earlier. Those guys all retired in 2016. So 2016, you have Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, and Kobe Bryant. I would say three of the 5 faces that defined basketball in the 2000s, retiring 6 years after that decade and being enshrined to the Hall of Fame, obviously 5 years after, 1 year later for these guys because they had to deal with COVID. But it is what it is. You get what I'm saying. And if you think about it right now, we're in a somewhat similar era in wrestling. Because as I mentioned, 2016, like I remember feeling melancholy at the end of the year, thinking about all the retirements that had happened. And with the exception of Tim Duncan, everyone who we're seeing on the screen right now, they all retired very, very washed up, as you should. Even Jordan, right? He was there with the Wizards. Still could score, but, you know, we try to remember that time period. Didn't happen. So their actual expiration date comes a few years after when they were actually in their prime. However, in wrestling, we're in a similar time period with a few different dynamics. Despite all these performers being in high profile positions on pay-per-views over the course of these 2 weeks, you have a rash of, I wouldn't say in your prime, but at the top of your game, retirements going on. I mean, look at these guys. You've got AJ and Cena tearing it up last week. You have Joe and Hangman, who I have no doubt are going to have like a fantastic match on Saturday. Come on. These guys are at the top of their game all these years later. And coinciding with these guys being on the top of their game is every time I open my phone, I get nothing about info about these guys retiring. And we've known this, obviously, this whole year has been the Cena retirement year. And AJ has made overtures about this for the last few months. And he recently told Tokyo Sports that he's retiring within the next year. Probably appear at WrestleMania, but it's not confirmed yet. The details are still undecided, but I'll definitely retire within the next year. I don't want to show fans that a side of me, basically, he says for the rest of that tweet that doesn't deliver. And that was shout out to Sean Rossap of Fightful for pulling that off of Tokyo Sports. And you have with Shaq Wrestling, Samoa Joe and further confirming his plans to retire very soon. So we're in one of those time periods, and then we had Bryan Danielson a little over a year ago actually really retire, even though it hasn't fully been announced. We're in a time period where a certain era is all flickering away. A bunch of performers that defined basically 14, 10, 12, however you want to quantify it, years of wrestling are all going away, which means that era is actually almost fully and completely behind us. And good for them for going out on top. But I think these guys are actually all very connected. They have certain pieces of connective tissue. Going back to our NBA example, if you look at any of those, you look at John Stockton and Michael Jordan being out there, Tim Duncan and Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade and Dirk Nowitzki. These guys defined the eras that they were a part of. They defined the eras by competing against each other, by contrasting to each other. They were what the other one had to deal with. And I think in pro wrestling, this string of retirements links back to performers that also have very, very similar connective tissue. And these performers here are bound together, not from the companies they were in, because they were in different companies, not necessarily from their style, because I would say all three of them have actually distinctly different wrestling style, promo style, all of that. But they are tied together by the context of which they existed in. Let me quickly explain. So check out these guys, first of all. Look how young they were. This is them at the start. That's probably late 90s in California. Samoa Joe, the Prototype, and Frankie Kazarian, by the way, hanging out, doing some stuff. I can't ever figure out, honestly, because I know they were both around Roland School there in California. I've never figured out if Cena and Danielson ever kind of crossed paths in that area. And then you have a DVD cover with a great NWA Wildside DVD, which is really the first promotion that AJ got noticed, especially after his release from WCW. And you see how far back these guys go, and you see by their looks what eras they've defined, and actually where we've gone since then. Photo from 2000. All right, well that about gets it. Let me explain though the era, the context they wrestled in, because going back to the NBA example or any other example, I think every superstar, any star, you need to evaluate them mostly in the era that they operated within. It's not fair to honestly and truthfully compare Michael Jordan and Victor Wembanyama. They operate basically in two different leagues. Like, these things are not related, and other than that, it's the same sport. Let's go over three things that these guys definitely had to deal with together, and I think we're all better for it in wrestling because of it. First of all, these guys had to deal with the hypercriticism and coverage of the internet in a way that others didn't. Now, I showed you that previous slide. In previous eras, wrestlers had to deal with smart marks. They, I think, still to this day, give an outsized notion of influence to the quote-unquote dirt sheets, because that was the media that was covering them, where the gossip was happening, where all of that was going on. And there was always these hardcore convention fans. It's not like hardcore fans didn't exist before, but the internet has made a hardcore fan out of even casuals. And it's made all of us, including me right now, including you guys watching this screen, hypercritical all the time of everything we're watching. So that's what these guys had to deal with. All of us with our star ratings, with our comparisons. I love that meme over there from Kayfabe News. Wrestling Nerd already has 5 Match of the Year candidates, and it's on January 1st, maybe January 5th. That could work. And you have the rise of the start of these tribal fan bases. All of these guys from this era, which were defined as kind of post-attitude, had to deal with that. Had to deal with that in a way that others didn't. And when you think about these three in particular, I'm kind of also informally throwing Bryan Danielson into all this. Talk about handling all that really, really well. To have your whole career under a very public microscope the entire time, and to be involved in contentious things in an industry, quite frankly, that wasn't as cool as it was in the previous decades. The other thing that these wrestlers in particular had to deal with was the wrestling monopoly being in full effect. And I think this was a really big deal for these guys and made things a lot different, really different for it. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner, you've got AJ Styles performing on WCW Thunder, which, again, I guess him and Ray, and I don't know, I guess Dustin, are those the only wrestlers that still go back to WCW? We've done this a few times on the show, but it's thinning out. But he was obviously, those guys were closer to their prime in WCW. AJ was just getting started. And we know the famous story. As a result of the merger, he did not want to take the new deal that was being offered to him by WWE. He decided to take his chances elsewhere. In an environment with a wrestling monopoly, for his career to still end up the way it did, and honestly for him to still be a WWE legend in the process and a wrestling legend outside of WWE, mad props to AJ Styles for what he accomplished, especially with that size and his accent, with one man running wrestling. Good for you, AJ. I'm also showcasing Bryan Danielson. Very similar story. He was let go because they needed to make roster cuts after the roster expanded. He had a developmental deal with WWE. Again, thank goodness that happened. God only knows how he would have been wasted with a company that didn't even really like to have a cruiserweight division at the time. So these competitors did not have the luxury that their always perceived to be much cooler predecessors did. They did not have multiple places to work. They did not have a variety of opponents to work with who had switched lines between companies. No, they were siloed within two wrestling companies. And again, this is a time where the company that was in WWE wasn't even thought of as that cool. TNA was if we think of TNA as the primary place where AJ and Joe wrestled, TNA was just WWE light. It wasn't counterculture. It wasn't counter programming. It was just a light WWE. They had to deal with that. They had to operate within that, and they excelled. The other, and I think the most important thing that they did, is they helped us. And even if we never really did, they helped us get over the wrestling boom. They had a really, really tough task when we look back at it. Because you have the just firework that was the Attitude Era. Everything that was popular in all wrestling at the time. Wrestling was cool. Wrestling was hip. Wrestling was trendy. Wrestling was huge. And then the fall happens. And these guys were around when the fall actually started happening, but they were much more infants. And again, they kind of got swallowed up by the fall happening. And then these guys are presented to you as the new guys, as the thing that's supposed to take that mantle. Now, I think John Cena bore much more of this burden than the other two because he had to be the edgy character that was operating in WWE and the top babyface. His entire career, I think, until he actually went face-to-face with The Rock and actually showed himself to be comparable and in some promo battles, let's be honest, better than The Rock, he had to take so much of that burden. And you can't think of anyone else that handled it like as much of a champ as he did. In contrast, the other two guys in Joe and AJ had to deal with being in a company or a few companies that were always thought of as second rate. Like WWE never had the most respect in the world, but it is thought of as a first-rate wrestling promotion compared to where these other guys were wrestling in front of smaller crowds, trying to make their way, being televised wrestlers. Also, TNA had to bear, and it wasn't even really their fault, but because of who they aligned themselves with, they had to bear the burden of the past of WCW, to be honest, the fallout of the wrestling war. And similar to the new generation, where there was like the post era, where everyone was still around, initially, think 92, 93, 91 maybe. And then you transitioned into the new generation era, where you have basically the new talent has to take over and they have to sing for their supper by themselves. And some might argue that both the new generation and this era didn't succeed. In fact, you could argue that pretty convincingly. The failure of the new generation is one of the things you can argue prompted the Attitude Era. This era, which I think has a lot of kinship there, I'm talking about here, a lot of kinship with the new generation era, was essentially allowed to die of natural causes. They never set the wrestling world on fire in the same way that things from the Attitude Era did, but they were at least allowed to wrestle their careers and how everything were played out essentially to maturity. And in the end, I think all of these people that are retiring right now are basically enshrined as legends. I say all that to say that they had a lot of pressure on them, these wrestlers, that generation, to be the people that made wrestling cool, entertaining, and engaging for the generation that had already seen all the good stuff, that had seen not only the good stuff, but it had burnt out on the good stuff, that had seen so much. These guys had to pick up wrestling when wrestling wasn't cool, and they had to be stalwarts for their company. They had to be pillars for their company. They had to be pillars for wrestling fans. They had to be pillars in wrestling discourse. And they did an excellent job. But it's also a little depressing too, because it means that outside of a CM Punk or Randy Orton, there's still guys around, obviously. That era is not an era we will be able to rely on much more. In fact, I think that's how maybe we should frame this era that we're in now. If you go back to like 2011 through maybe 2014, 2015, the Attitude Era was in a similar spot. That's when you'd have The Rock coming back. You had Austin on a WrestleMania. You had Kane in big time positions. You had the embers of the Attitude Era essentially finally being put out, using the last bits that you could actually get from that era before that era just becomes nostalgia. We're in that era, and we're in that time period now with this generation of wrestlers. They're about to be gone, and we're not going to be able to rely on them anymore. Think of how reliable Cena was while he was a full-time performer. Think of how reliable Bryan Danielson has been for great matches, consistent performance, and I think really showed his mettle as an overall diverse performer when he got to AEW and was a cornerstone. And do I need to say more about the consistency of AJ Styles and Samoa Joe? In particular, keeping TNA, and shout out to Frankie Kazarian, Christopher Daniels, and others, Jeremy Borash, keeping that thing watchable, giving a reason to watch, quite frankly, a bad wrestling show. Those men were super talented. They didn't always get the credit that they probably deserved, but they were definitely key parts of wrestling for the last 20 years. And we may not realize it now, and some of them have been gone and out of their prime for a while, but when they are gone, we are absolutely going to miss that group. That's funny we said that about how WCW is operating. I remember being at a company once where people from the competitive company, that building had just shut down. There was massive layoffs. They had gone into business. And there was people that would tell us about after they announced the business was going down, they were still hosting like training classes and having new hires. And I guess it was worth it for people to, have a job for a couple of weeks and make a couple of weeks worth of income as they look for something new. But I can't think of what a black hole that must be. All right, guys. I hit the post in just enough time. I wasted probably too much time making fun of Wade Keller's grammar policing. But I do have another meeting to get to where I have to completely, change my costume. It's a good comment to end on. Fernando says, and let's put that up there. The future of WWE is in very good hands. Javon Evans, Obafemi, Ricky Saints, Jacob Fatu, and Braun Breaker is the future of WWE. And considering the landscape, the injuries, and everything I'm just talking about, that future may be here a lot sooner than we had anticipated. Guys, I got to get to my meeting. It's been fun. I will make every reasonable effort to have a show next week to be consistent with 2 weeks in a row. But as you guys know, you never know. Thanks for hanging with me, though, on this really, really, really bite-sized show. Have a good one, guys. See you next week.